The morning my father died, everything changed in the blink of an eye. One moment, I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching him flip pancakes into silly shapes that made me laugh, the way he always did on Sunday mornings. The next, he was clutching his chest, collapsing right there on the cold tile floor. I was only 7, but that terrifying image is seared into my memory, his face twisting in pain, the spatula clattering beside him. I froze, unsure if he'd ever get up again. The ambulance arrived too late to save him. And suddenly, the world I thought I knew was gone. How does a child make sense of losing the person who made her feel safe? How do you keep going when your foundation crumbles beneath you? My name is Margaret, and that morning didn't just take my father away. It set my entire life on a path I never expected. At 7 years old, I was thrust into a new reality filled with silence, loss, and a house that felt far too big and empty for just me and my mother. For a while, Mom and I clung to each other like lifelines, but I quickly realized she was unraveling too. Then came David, her second husband, and soon after, my baby brother Ethan. The moment I thought I might find stability, the balance shifted again, but this time it was uneven. My mother's world narrowed until it revolved around Ethan's every need and fear, leaving me to fade into the background. Did she love me less? Was I invisible? I asked myself these questions over and over, trying to find a place where I belonged. Growing up in that house was like walking a tightrope, with every step carefully measured to avoid stirring up more tension. I watched helplessly as Ethan withdrew into himself, protected and sheltered to the point where the outside world was a threat he refused to face. Meanwhile, my accomplishments, the piano recitals, the school honors, went unnoticed, drowned out by Mom's focus on Ethan's struggles. David tried to fill some of the gaps for me, quietly supporting my dreams and cheering me on, but even his kindness couldn't erase the growing distance in our family. How long could I keep pretending everything was fine? When does hope become exhaustion? Now, looking back, I wonder how much longer I could have stayed silent before I lost myself completely. How do you survive in a home where your worth is measured by how invisible you can be? This is my story, a journey through grief, neglect, and the painful struggle to be seen and loved. It's about finding strength when the ones who should protect you are caught in their own battles, and ultimately, discovering the courage to break free. So, what happens when the person you once depended on the most turns into the one who holds you back? Stay with me, because this story is far from over. If I thought losing my father shattered my world, nothing could have prepared me for the storm that came after. Just 2 years later, my mother married David, a kind man with a quiet smile and eyes full of hope. At first, I believed things might get better. Maybe with David around, the heavy silence in our house would lift. But then, Ethan was born and everything shifted again, like the ground beneath me was slowly tilting, and I was losing my balance all over again. Suddenly, the attention that used to be shared between my mom and me became completely focused on this tiny new life, and I was left on the sidelines, wondering if I'd ever matter again. Helen, my mother, gave up her job as a librarian to care for Ethan full-time. She said those early years were crucial, that Ethan needed her in a way I never had. But what it really felt like to me was that she was closing a door on me. The lunches I forgot to bring, the dinners I ate alone, small things that slowly chipped away at my sense of belonging. David tried to notice, to fill the space where my mother's gaze no longer reached, but even his quiet support wasn't enough to keep the cracks from spreading. Ethan wasn't just her priority. He became her whole world, and I was left drifting in the shadows, clutching at memories of the father I lost. Watching Ethan grow was like watching a fragile bird trapped in a cage of overprotection. He was so sheltered that every step outside our front door felt like a battle. My mother's fears ruled his life. Sports were dangerous, friends were a risk, and independence was something to delay at all costs. I remember one night when David suggested Ethan try out for the neighborhood soccer team. Mom's reaction was like a slap in the face, her voice sharp, her eyes fierce. He's not ready. He could get hurt. What if he twists his ankle? What if he gets a concussion? I wanted to scream, to tell her that Ethan needed to learn how to fly on his own, but the words got stuck deep inside me. Was it love? Or was it fear that kept her holding on so tightly? David kept trying to reason with Mom, but each conversation ended in frustration and tears. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore, it was about us. About the family we were supposed to be, but never quite became. The house felt like a battlefield where no one won, only lost a little more each day. And I was caught in the crossfire, trying to be the perfect daughter, the quiet one who wouldn't add to the tension. But inside, I was breaking. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending that everything was fine when my heart was screaming for attention. Meanwhile, Ethan retreated deeper into himself. His room became a fortress filled with video games and darkness, a place where he could escape the pressures he couldn't face outside. Mom excused his isolation, saying he was sensitive and needed time. But I saw the sadness behind his eyes, the way he looked lost and angry. David called it stalling, but Mom just shook her head, unwilling to see the truth. And I felt powerless, watching my little brother fade while the family I dreamed of slipped further away. In those moments, I wondered if I'd ever find my place again, not just in my family, but in the world. Would I always be the forgotten daughter, the one left behind? Or was there a way out of the shadow that Ethan's struggles cast over us all? I didn't have the answers then, only the growing weight of loneliness and the faintest spark of hope that someday, somehow, things could change. But could they? Or were we doomed to repeat the same heartbreak, again and again? Stay with me, because this chapter is just the beginning of a story about family, pain, and the fight to be seen and heard. It's about how the ties that bind us can also hold us back, and what it takes to break free. The day David died, something inside me finally broke, and not just because I lost the man who had quietly been my greatest ally. It was the moment when the fragile balance that had held our family together for years shattered completely. David's heart attack came without warning, just like my father's years before, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on my chest. I was 22, standing in a hospital corridor that suddenly felt colder than any place I had ever known. Watching him slip away, I realized how much of my childhood had been spent clinging to the hope that he would protect me from falling completely through the cracks. But with him gone, I was truly alone. Mom's grief was loud and theatrical, the kind of heartbreak that filled rooms but didn't touch the soul. She sobbed and wailed about how much she'd lost, but I saw right through it. Her tears weren't just for David. They were for the life she feared losing, the lifestyle built on his steady income and her sense of control. Ethan barely glanced up from his phone during the funeral, dressed in wrinkled clothes and completely disconnected from the moment. Mom explained it away as his way of processing, but I knew better. The brother who once needed so much protection had become indifferent, if not outright resentful. In the weeks that followed, the cracks in our family grew wider and more dangerous. Without David's steady hand, Mom's anxieties spiraled. Bills went unpaid, repairs were ignored, and the house, once meticulously cared for, fell into neglect. Ethan retreated further into himself, spending his days gaming and his nights lost in a fog of aimless distractions. The little hope that had kept me going, the promise that maybe things would get better, felt like a cruel joke. How do you rebuild a family when the pillars holding it up have crumbled? And how do you protect yourself when the ones you trusted most become shadows of the people you loved? I moved out soon after, leaving behind the chaos to forge a life of my own in a small city, just a few hours away. It wasn't easy. Every penny I saved went into rent and bills, but it was mine. A place where I could breathe without the weight of my family's problems pressing down on me. I took a job at a local library, surrounded by stories of hope and survival, and I clung to the belief that I could write my own ending. But the guilt never left. Sending money home each month, I tried to keep a lifeline to the family I feared losing for good. Yet the distance only seemed to deepen the divide. On one visit home, I walked into a scene that felt like a cruel twist of fate, a woman I didn't recognize lounging on our old couch, surrounded by empty snack bags and a careless attitude that made my skin crawl. Cassie, Ethan's girlfriend, was everything I feared: disrespectful, lazy, and completely indifferent to the crumbling world around her. Mom's eyes sparkled as she spoke of Cassie like she was a blessing, the stabilizing influence Ethan desperately needed. But I saw the truth: a toxic presence taking advantage of a family already stretched too thin. The final blow came when I learned Mom had signed everything over to Ethan, leaving me nothing but memories and unanswered questions. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound I'd known. When I confronted her, the words that came back were colder than winter's bite. "I never loved you like I love Ethan. He's all that matters." That night, walking out of that house for what felt like the last time, I realized I had to let go, not just of the family I wanted, but of the idea that their approval was what defined me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like the weight of expectations and disappointments was crushing your spirit, then you understand the fight I was facing. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about reclaiming your life when everything you thought mattered has been taken away.
So,
What happens when the people who should protect you become the ones who push you away? How do you find your own light when the darkness feels endless? Stick with me, because the hardest part is yet to come. I still remember the day I finally walked away, the day I closed the door on the family I once believed would be my forever. It wasn't sudden, not really. It had been building for years, a slow, painful unraveling that left me raw and exhausted. But standing there in the fading light of that late summer afternoon, the weight of it all pressed down on me so hard I thought I might collapse. I was 26, with a heart full of scars and a head buzzing with the countless broken promises that had marked my childhood and adulthood alike. My mother's cold words echoed in my mind, the ones she said so plainly, so cruelly: "I never loved you like I love Ethan. He's all that matters." Those words cut deeper than any wound, shattering the last fragile thread of hope I'd clung to for so long. The house I grew up in was a shadow of itself, walls stained with neglect, rooms cluttered with memories I no longer wanted to face. Ethan's girlfriend, Cassie, ruled the space with a careless arrogance that made my skin crawl. She treated my mother's home like a playground, leaving trash in every corner, taking what she wanted without a thought. And my brother? He barely noticed I was there. His eyes, once full of promise, were now glazed over with apathy, fixed on the glowing screen of his endless video games. It was as if the brother I had known had vanished, replaced by someone I didn't recognize or want to. I tried, in those final months, to hold it all together. I sent money, $500 every month, to help keep the house afloat, to keep the peace that was slipping through our fingers. But the more I gave, the more I felt like I was drowning in a sea of demands and disappointments. The guilt gnawed at me relentlessly, whispering that I was failing them, that I was abandoning my family when they needed me most. Yet, the truth I couldn't ignore was that my support wasn't building bridges, it was enabling a cycle of dependency and denial that kept us all trapped. The turning point came unexpectedly, as it often does. One quiet evening, after another exhausting visit filled with tension and unspoken resentments, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring at my bank statement. The recurring transfer to Mom's account was a lifeline I'd been holding on to, a tether to a family that was slipping farther and farther away. My finger hovered over the cancel button, trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. Could I really do this? Could I let go after all these years of sacrifice? The answer came not from courage, but from a deep, aching need to save myself. I canceled the payment. The silence that followed was deafening. For days, my phone was silent. No desperate calls, no pleading messages, just emptiness. But soon, the storm came. My mother's voice, sharp and accusing, cut through the quiet with a fury I hadn't heard before. She called me every name in the book, blamed me for tearing the family apart, for abandoning Ethan and her when they needed me most. Tommy, sorry, Ethan, sent his own barrage of angry texts, threats masked as concern, trying to guilt me back into submission. And then there was Cassie, weaving her web of manipulation through social media, painting me as the villain in a story I no longer recognized. Through it all, I stood firm. I blocked their numbers, silenced their voices, and began to rebuild my life on my own terms. The money I once sent to prop up a crumbling house went instead into a down payment for my own home, a small, cozy place where I could finally breathe. For the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of peace, a sense of control over my future that no one could take away. Walking away wasn't easy. It meant breaking ties with the people I loved, even as they hurt me. It meant facing loneliness and doubt. But it also meant discovering a strength I never knew I had. I learned that sometimes loving yourself means saying no to those who don't see your worth. It means choosing freedom over fear and hope over heartbreak. So here I am, telling my story, not because it's easy, but because I want you to know that it's okay to let go. It's okay to walk away from what's hurting you, even if it's family. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself first. And that is the beginning of true freedom. The day I stepped into my new apartment for the first time, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief, like I was finally waking up from a long, restless nightmare. For years, I had lived in the shadow of my family's chaos, caught in a never-ending cycle of sacrifice, guilt, and heartache. But here, in this modest one-bedroom nestled in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, I was finally free. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, a stark contrast to the stale tension that had hung over my childhood home for as long as I could remember. I ran my fingers along the smooth countertops and smiled softly, imagining the life I would build here, on my own terms, without anyone's expectations weighing me down. But freedom, I quickly learned, was both a blessing and a challenge. The phone calls started almost immediately. At first, they were quiet, tentative, my mother's voice laced with a fragile hope that I might come back, that I might still be the daughter she once knew. "Margaret," she'd say, her tone carefully measured, "we miss you. Ethan needs you." But as days turned into weeks, the calls grew more desperate, more demanding. The quiet pleas gave way to accusations, the hope twisted into guilt trips and threats. "How could you abandon your family?" they'd ask. "Without your help, we don't know how we'll survive." I listened, sometimes silently, sometimes fighting back, but deep down, I knew that this was the cost of setting boundaries, that breaking free meant breaking hearts, including my own. Ethan's name came up in every conversation, his struggles becoming the armor my mother wielded to keep me tethered to a life that no longer fit me. He was still stuck in the same place, unemployed, lost in video games, letting opportunities slip through his fingers. I'd offer help, suggested programs, even job leads. But every suggestion was met with resistance or excuses. "He's sensitive," Mom would say. "He just needs more time." But time was running out for all of us. I watched from a distance as my brother's potential faded, swallowed by apathy and fear, and it broke my heart in ways I couldn't fully express. There was also Cassie, Ethan's girlfriend, whose presence was like a shadow creeping over everything I tried to hold on to. She texted me once, a long, condescending message full of thinly veiled threats and accusations, trying to paint me as the villain in their story. She claimed to understand Ethan better than I ever could, said I was tearing the family apart. I read her words and felt a flicker of anger, but also a strange clarity. They had created their own world, one where I was the outsider, the enemy. And that was okay. Because in this new chapter, I wasn't looking for their approval, I was looking for peace. I poured my energy into my work, building a career that gave me purpose and pride. I started saving every dollar I could, watching that down payment fund grow steadily. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol of my resilience, a testament to the years of struggle and strength that had brought me here. Each time I looked at the figures in my bank account, I felt a little more empowered, a little closer to the life I had dreamed of for so long. Sometimes when I drive past the old neighborhood, memories flood back, laughter and tears, fights and reconciliations, hopes that were never quite realized. I wonder about Mom and Ethan, whether they're still caught in the same patterns or if they've finally found their way. Part of me wants to reach out, to bridge the gap, but I know now that healing takes time and sometimes space. For the first time, I'm okay with not having all the answers. This is my story, not just of loss and pain, but of finding freedom in the face of family fractures. It's about learning that sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one that saves you. And as I close this chapter and open the next, I carry with me a quiet hope that one day, peace won't feel like a distant dream, but a home I've truly earned. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, shaking me out of a rare moment of calm like a sudden thunderclap. It was my Aunt Linda, her voice tight, worry threading every word. "Margaret, you need to know what's happening back home." I gripped the receiver tighter, my heart already pounding. After all these years of distance and silence, after I'd built a life so far removed from the chaos I left behind, a part of me had hoped the storm had finally passed. But there was no escaping the shadows that still clung to the house where I grew up. My mother and Ethan were barely holding on, living off what was left of David's savings, scraping by after the last of their belongings were sold off. The Chevrolet, the workshop tools, even the furniture, they'd all vanished like ghosts of a life once carefully maintained but now unraveling in slow motion. Hearing Aunt Linda's words felt like a punch to the gut, but it also stirred something deep inside me, a complex mix of guilt, relief, and determination. Guilt for stepping away, relief for the distance I'd found, and determination to face whatever came next, no matter how hard. I hadn't heard from Mom or Ethan in months. My phone had been silent, my heart somewhat shielded from their world. But knowing they were struggling so desperately brought all the old pain rushing back. Memories of broken promises, of being overlooked and used, clashed with the aching hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to help without losing myself again. When I finally decided to visit, the sight that greeted me was like stepping into a forgotten time capsule. Dust settled thick on every surface, weeds strangling the lawn, paint peeling like dead skin from the window frames. The house was tired, worn down by years of neglect, and somehow, that reflected the woman who opened the door to me. Mom looked decades older than I remembered, her usual vibrant energy replaced by a fragile, trembling shadow of herself. Deep wrinkles lined her face, and her hair, once always perfectly styled, hung in loose strands streaked with gray. There was no warmth in her eyes, only exhaustion and fear. Inside, the chaos was suffocating, dishes piled high in the sink, a lingering musty smell, and the overwhelming sense that this place was no longer a home, but a battleground for survival. Mom's voice broke when she asked for help, her pride swallowed by desperation. "We're running out of money, Margaret. Your father's savings, they're almost gone." I listened, trying to hold back my own tears as she explained how Ethan was searching for work but kept hitting walls, how the bills piled up, and how the future looked bleak. I wanted to believe things could turn around, but deep down, I knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. What struck me most was the helplessness that had settled over all of us, a family fractured by loss, fear, and years of neglect. Ethan was still the boy who hid behind video games and excuses, reluctant to face the world that seemed determined to reject him. Cassie, his girlfriend, had moved in, adding a new layer of tension I wasn't ready for. She wasn't the solution my mother claimed, but rather another complication, taking without giving, more shadow than light. I felt trapped between wanting to save my family and needing to protect myself, caught in a painful tug-of-war that threatened to pull me under. But even in that darkness, something inside me refused to break. As I locked eyes with Mom and saw the fragility behind her bravado, I realized that while I couldn't fix everything, I could start by setting boundaries that didn't leave me broken. Helping didn't mean sacrificing myself again. For the first time in years, I understood that true strength sometimes meant walking away to find peace, not running from responsibility, but redefining it on my own terms. So here I stand, at a crossroads between the past I can't change and the future I'm still learning to believe in. My family story isn't over, but neither is mine. And as I step forward into this uncertain new chapter, I carry with me the hard-earned wisdom that freedom comes not from holding on tightly, but from knowing when to let go. The day Cassie moved in, the last thread holding what was left of our family began to fray, and I knew, deep down, that things would never be the same again. I still remember the sinking feeling in my stomach when I walked through the front door and saw her sprawled across our old couch, surrounded by empty soda cans and crumpled snack bags, scrolling through her phone with that careless smirk. It wasn't just the mess, though the clutter alone was shocking. It was the way she acted, like she owned the place, like she belonged there more than I ever had. "Who is she?" I asked my mother later, hoping for some explanation that would make sense of the chaos. But the answer was worse than I could have imagined. "She's Ethan's fiancée," Mom said, as if that simple fact should make me accept everything without question. Cassie's presence was like a storm cloud hanging over the house, darkening every corner of my already fragile relationship with my family. Mom gushed about how Cassie was a good influence, how she'd stopped Ethan from going out drinking with his old crowd. But all I saw was a woman who took and took, drinking the last of my imported beer, eating the food I bought for the house, never lifting a finger to help. And Ethan? He barely looked up from his video games, indifferent to the mess or the tension his new girlfriend created. It was as if the brother I once knew had disappeared, replaced by someone I couldn't reach no matter how hard I tried. That's when the real shock came. Mom told me she'd signed everything over to Ethan, including the house. There was a will, she said, and it was all his now. My heart sank as I tried to process what that meant. The place where I'd grown up, the memories I clung to, the family I thought I still had, all gone in an instant. I confronted her, asking how she could do this without even talking to me, but her eyes were cold and unyielding. "I never loved you the way I love Ethan," she said flatly. "He's better than you in every way that matters. You're not welcome here anymore." Those words hit me like a blow I never saw coming. For years, I tried to hold on to hope that maybe beneath her obsession with Ethan, Mom still cared about me. But that day, all those hopes shattered. The quiet click of the door closing behind me was louder than any argument, louder than any plea I'd ever made. As I walked away from that house, from that family, I felt something shift inside, a mixture of sorrow, relief, and an unexpected sense of freedom. I realized then that my fight for their love and approval had been a battle I could never win. No matter how much I sacrificed, no matter how much I gave, I wasn't enough. And, for the first time, I understood that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away, to protect your heart, to save your spirit. I left with a heavy heart but a clear mind, ready to write a new story for myself. One where I was no longer defined by the family that had let me go, but by the strength I found when I stood on my own. So this is where my journey truly begins. In the painful but powerful act of letting go, and in the hope that someday I'll find a place to call home. Not because of who I come from, but because of who I choose to be. The moment I canceled that monthly transfer, the one I'd sent without fail for years, was like closing the final chapter on a book I'd read too many times, full of pain, sacrifice, and disappointment. I sat staring at my phone screen, finger trembling just before I pressed cancel recurring payment, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But deep down, I knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment I chose myself over guilt, freedom over obligation. For so long, I'd carried the weight of my family's struggles, sacrificing my dreams and my peace to keep a crumbling house from falling apart. But that money hadn't fixed anything, it only kept us stuck in a cycle of dependency and resentment. Almost immediately after I stopped the payments, the messages came pouring in, angry, desperate, and relentless. My mother's voice, once fragile, turned sharp and accusing. "How could you do this? After everything I've done for you?"